Imagine living in a world where your whispered concerns about a neighbor's behavior could summon you before a tribunal of judgment, where your casual observations shared over a garden fence could transform you from respected community member into criminal defendant, where the simple act of repeating what you had heard from others could result in public punishment, financial ruin, and permanent social disgrace. This was not the realm of totalitarian surveillance states or dystopian fiction, but the daily reality of medieval and early modern Europe, where gossip was not merely discouraged, but criminalized, where reputation became a matter of law rather than opinion, and where entire court systems emerged with the sole purpose of policing the flow of information between neighbors, friends, and family members. The courts of reputation represented one of history's most sophisticated attempts to control human communication, transforming the natural social process of sharing information into a legal minefield where every conversation carried the potential for criminal prosecution, and every listener became a potential witness in proceedings that could destroy lives over words spoken in confidence. These were not simple defamation laws designed to protect individuals from false accusations, but comprehensive systems of communication control that treated gossip as a threat to social order, requiring constant surveillance, systematic prosecution, and severe punishment for violations that were often impossible to avoid in communities where information sharing was essential for daily survival and social cohesion. In the shadowed chambers of ecclesiastical courts and the formal proceedings of civil tribunals, judges and prosecutors developed elaborate legal frameworks for evaluating the truth intent and social impact of private conversations, creating judicial systems that required neighbors to testify against neighbors, friends to report friends and family members, to betray family members in service of a legal order that claimed to protect reputation while actually destroying the trust and communication that made community life possible. The ecclesiastical courts of gossip emerged from the church is determination to control not only public behavior, but private thought and communication, transforming confession from a sacrament of forgiveness into a surveillance system that monitored and prosecuted the sharing of information deemed harmful to social order or clerical authority. These courts operated under the principle that gossip was a form of spiritual pollution that contaminated communities through the spread of sinful knowledge, malicious speculation, and unauthorized information about the private lives of church members and religious authorities. Priests were required to investigate and report gossip shared during confession, transforming the most private spiritual conversations into potential evidence for criminal prosecution, while parishioners were encouraged to report neighbors whose conversations suggested moral corruption, doctrinal deviation, or insufficient respect for religious authority. The courts developed elaborate procedures for investigating gossip, requiring multiple witnesses to verify not only the content of conversations, but the tone, context, and intent behind shared information, creating legal processes that could transform casual social interaction into complex criminal cases, requiring extensive testimony and detailed analysis of community relationships. Punishments for gossip in ecclesiastical courts ranged from public penance and financial fines to excommunication and permanent banishment from Christian community, while the most serious cases of gossip deemed seditious or heretical could result in imprisonment, torture, or execution as crimes against both spiritual and temporal authority. The courts created impossible situations where remaining silent about observed wrongdoing could be condemned as failing in Christian duty, while speaking about observed wrongdoing could be prosecuted as criminal gossip, ensuring that community members lived in constant fear of both their knowledge and their ignorance of their neighbors' activities. The civil courts of reputation developed parallel legal frameworks for prosecuting gossip as a crime against social order, property rights, and community stability, treating reputation as a form of property that could be stolen, damaged, or destroyed through unauthorized communication, requiring legal protection and criminal prosecution. These courts operated under legal theories that portrayed gossip as a form of theft, stealing the good name and social standing that constituted a person's most valuable possessions and essential assets for economic survival and social participation. Citizens were required to report conversations that might damage the reputation of community members, while those who failed to report harmful gossip could themselves be prosecuted as accessories to reputation crimes or conspirators in social disorder. The legal standards for prosecution were deliberately vague and subjective, allowing courts to interpret virtually any form of negative communication as criminal gossip while providing extensive discretion for selective enforcement that could be used to silence political opposition, suppress social criticism, or eliminate personal enemies through apparently legitimate legal processes. The courts developed complex systems for evaluating the truth of gossip, requiring extensive investigation into private behavior, personal relationships, and family histories that often revealed more damaging information than the original gossip had contained, creating legal processes that destroyed privacy while claiming to protect reputation. Penalties for civil gossip crimes included substantial financial fines, public humiliation through stocks, or pillory loss of citizenship rights, and in extreme cases banishment from the community, while repeat offenders faced increasingly severe punishments that could include imprisonment, physical punishment, or permanent social exile. The gender dynamics of gossip prosecution reveal the systematic use of reputation courts to control female communication and social interaction, as women were disproportionately targeted for gossip crimes while simultaneously being excluded from the legal processes that might protect them from false accusations and unfair prosecution. Women's conversations about domestic abuse, economic exploitation, sexual misconduct, and social injustice were systematically criminalized as inappropriate female speech that threatened male authority and social stability, while men's discussions of the same topics were typically treated as legitimate concerns, requiring investigation rather than criminal gossip warranting prosecution. The courts developed elaborate theories about female nature that portrayed women as inherently prone to gossip, morally incapable of controlling their speech, and socially dangerous when allowed to share information without male supervision and approval. Female defendants in gossip cases faced gender-specific punishments designed to shame and control their speech, scold as bridles that prevented talking, ducking stools that symbolically washed away their words, and public humiliation rituals that transformed their punishment into entertainment, while warning other women about the consequences of unauthorized communication. Women who gossiped about powerful men faced particularly severe prosecution, as their words were interpreted not merely as social disorder, but as challenges to patriarchal authority that required systematic suppression through legal mechanisms designed to silence female criticism of male behavior and institutional power. The courts created impossible double standards, where women were simultaneously expected to maintain social morality through appropriate communication while being condemned for any form of communication that revealed male misconduct or challenged existing power relationships, ensuring that female speech could always be characterized as either inadequate or excessive, depending on the convenience of male authorities. The economic motivations behind gossip prosecution demonstrate how reputation courts served the financial interests of wealthy and powerful community members who used legal mechanisms to suppress information about their business practices, personal behavior, and political activities while generating revenue through fines and penalties imposed on those who dared to discuss their conduct. Merchants used gossip prosecutions to silence customers who complained about fraudulent practices, while employers prosecuted workers who discussed dangerous working conditions or unfair wages, transforming labor organizing and consumer protection into criminal activities that could be suppressed through apparently legitimate legal processes. The courts developed sliding scales of punishment that effectively allowed wealthy defendants to purchase immunity from gossip prosecution through substantial fines, while imposing severe physical punishments on poor defendants who could not afford financial penalties, creating two-tiered justice systems that protected the powerful while silencing the powerless. Legal fees associated with gossip prosecutions often exceeded the financial resources of defendants, creating situations where the cost of legal defense was more devastating than the original punishment, while successful prosecutors could recover their legal expenses from convicted defendants, creating financial incentives for false accusations and vindictive prosecutions. The reputation court system generated substantial revenue for legal professionals, court officials, and government authorities through filing fees, fines, penalties, and confiscated property, creating economic incentives for aggressive prosecution of gossip crimes, regardless of their social necessity or moral justification. The social control functions of gossip prosecution extended far beyond individual cases to create comprehensive systems of communication surveillance that monitored and controlled the flow of information throughout entire communities, transforming neighbors into informants and social interaction into potential criminal activity. The courts established networks of official and unofficial informants who monitored conversations, reported suspicious communication, and provided testimony against community members who violated speech regulations, creating climates of mutual surveillance that destroyed trust and spontaneous communication, while ensuring government control over information flow. Citizens learned to practice self-censorship, avoiding topics that might be interpreted as criminal gossip, while simultaneously monitoring their own speech for violations that could be reported by others, creating psychological states of constant vigilance that transformed normal social interaction into anxiety-provoking performance, requiring careful calculation of legal risk. The prosecution of gossip created powerful incentives for social conformity and political compliance, as any criticism of authority figures, economic systems, or social arrangements could be reframed as criminal gossip, requiring legal punishment, while those who remained silent about observed problems could claim moral virtue through their refusal to engage in prosecutable communication. Communities developed elaborate informal systems for sharing necessary information while avoiding criminal liability, using coded language, symbolic communication, and indirect reference that allowed essential social functions to continue while protecting speakers from legal prosecution, demonstrating the artificial nature of gossip restrictions that conflicted with basic human communication needs. The enforcement mechanisms developed by reputation courts required extensive bureaucratic systems for monitoring communication, investigating accusations, and prosecuting violations, creating vast legal apparatus dedicated to policing human speech and social interaction with resources that might otherwise have been devoted to addressing genuine crimes and social problems. Court officials developed elaborate procedures for gathering evidence about private conversations, requiring multiple witnesses, detailed testimony, and extensive investigation into personal relationships and family histories that often revealed more information than the original gossip had contained, creating legal processes that became vehicles for systematic invasion of privacy under the guise of protecting reputation. The courts established systems of plea bargaining and reduced sentences for defendants who agreed to inform on other community members, creating powerful incentives for betrayal and false accusation, while ensuring steady supplies of new cases for prosecution, regardless of the actual prevalence of criminal gossip in community life. Professional informants emerged who made their living by reporting gossip violations to authorities, creating economic incentives for false accusations and vindictive prosecutions, while establishing career paths that depended on maintaining high levels of social conflict and mutual suspicion within communities. The legal system developed specialized expertise in evaluating the credibility of gossip, creating professional witnesses' expert testimony, and elaborate procedures for determining the truth or falsehood of disputed conversations, transforming simple social interactions into complex legal disputes requiring extensive professional intervention and substantial financial resources. The psychological impact of living under gossip prosecution created communities characterized by fear, suspicion, and social isolation as residents learned to avoid meaningful communication with neighbors, friends, and even family members who might report their conversations to authorities seeking evidence for criminal prosecutions. Citizens developed complex psychological strategies for managing the constant threat of accusation, including elaborate mental filters for controlling speech, careful monitoring of conversation partners, and systematic avoidance of topics that might trigger legal investigation, transforming normal human communication into calculated performance designed to minimize legal risk rather than facilitate genuine social connection. The fear of gossip prosecution created social environments where people avoided discussing problems that required community attention, failed to share information that might protect others from harm, and remained silent about misconduct that harmed community welfare, demonstrating how legal restrictions on communication could actually increase rather than decrease social problems by preventing the information sharing necessary for community self-protection and problem-solving. Children growing up under gossip prosecution learn to distrust communication, view social interaction as potentially dangerous, and practice extreme caution in forming relationships that might expose them to legal liability through association with accused gossips or through inadvertent violation of speech regulations they were too young to fully understand. The resistance and adaptation strategies developed by communities living under gossip prosecution demonstrate human ingenuity in preserving essential communication while avoiding legal punishment, creating alternative systems for information sharing that maintained social cohesion despite official attempts to control speech and monitor social interaction. Citizens developed elaborate codes and symbolic languages for discussing prohibited topics using metaphors, indirect references, and cultural allusions that allowed meaningful communication while providing plausible deniability if reported to authorities, demonstrating the fundamental human need for information sharing that could not be eliminated through legal prohibition. Underground networks emerged for sharing information about dangerous individuals, corrupt officials, and social problems that could not be discussed openly without risking prosecution, creating parallel communication systems that operated outside official channels while serving essential community protection functions. Some communities developed collective resistance strategies, agreeing to refuse cooperation with gossip investigations, declining to serve as witnesses in reputation cases, and providing mutual support for those facing prosecution, demonstrating that legal control over communication required community compliance that could be withdrawn through coordinated resistance. The most successful adaptation strategies involved the transformation of gossip into apparently legitimate forms of communication, religious testimony, business consultation, educational discussion that served the same information-sharing functions while avoiding the legal categories that triggered criminal prosecution, revealing the artificial nature of legal distinctions that conflicted with basic human communication needs. The international variations in gossip prosecution reveal how different societies adapted similar legal concepts to serve local political and social control needs, creating diverse systems of communication surveillance that shared common functions while reflecting specific cultural and political contexts. Some societies focused gossip prosecution on political sedition and criticism of government authority, using reputation courts primarily to suppress dissent and maintain political control rather than to regulate social morality or personal behavior. Other legal systems emphasized the protection of religious authority and orthodox doctrine, prosecuting gossip that questioned clerical conduct or theological positions, while permitting relatively free discussion of secular topics that did not threaten ecclesiastical power. Certain communities developed gossip laws that specifically targeted economic information, discussions of prices, business practices, labor conditions that might interfere with merchant interests or disrupt established economic relationships, using communication control as a tool of economic regulation rather than general social control. The severity of gossip punishments varied dramatically between different legal systems, with some societies imposing only mild social penalties while others treated reputation crimes as capital offenses worthy of execution, demonstrating the arbitrary nature of legal categories that transformed normal human behavior into varying degrees of criminal activity. The modern echoes of historical gossip prosecution can be seen in contemporary legal and social systems that continue to criminalize or severely restrict forms of communication that threaten institutional authority, challenge established power relationships, or disseminate information that powerful interests prefer to keep private. Contemporary defamation laws, privacy regulations, and communication restrictions often serve similar functions to historical gossip prosecutions, protecting institutional reputation while restricting public access to information necessary for democratic participation and social accountability. Social media platforms and digital communication systems have created new forms of reputation control that echo historical gossip prosecutions, with algorithms and automated systems monitoring communication for violations of terms of service that can result in account suspension, content removal, and social isolation from digital communities. Professional and institutional retaliation against whistleblowers, critics, and information sharers demonstrates the enduring power of reputation-based social control, as individuals who reveal misconduct or challenge authority continue to face systematic consequences that destroy careers, relationships, and social standing, regardless of the accuracy or social value of their communication. The legacy of reputation courts extends beyond their historical context to illuminate fundamental tensions between individual freedom of expression and institutional needs for communication control, revealing enduring patterns of social conflict that continue to shape legal and political systems in contemporary societies. The historical experience of gossip prosecution demonstrates that attempts to control human communication through legal mechanisms typically fail to eliminate the targeted behavior while creating extensive systems of surveillance, punishment, and social control that serve institutional interests more effectively than they serve stated goals of protecting reputation or maintaining social order. Understanding the history of gossip prosecution provides crucial insight into the mechanisms of communication control and the importance of protecting free expression against institutional attempts to restrict information sharing that serves public interests rather than institutional convenience. The sophisticated legal frameworks developed by historical reputation courts reveal the extensive resources and systematic effort required to suppress natural human communication, demonstrating that freedom of expression requires constant vigilance against legal innovations that transform normal social interaction into criminal activity under the guise of protecting reputation, privacy, or social order. As you contemplate this history of legal systems that transformed gossip from social interaction into criminal activity, consider how contemporary restrictions on communication, information sharing, and public discussion serve institutional interests while restricting the human communication necessary for community cohesion, social accountability, and democratic participation. The medieval and early modern experience with reputation courts reveals the dangers of allowing institutions to criminalize communication that challenges their authority or reveals their misconduct, while demonstrating the human resilience and creativity necessary to preserve essential social functions despite systematic legal attempts to control speech and monitor social interaction. If this exploration of history's most comprehensive systems of communication surveillance has revealed patterns of institutional control that extend beyond historical gossip prosecutions into contemporary restrictions on information sharing and public discourse, share your insights. Subscribe for more investigations into the mechanisms of communication control. And remember that understanding historical precedents provides essential knowledge for recognizing and resisting contemporary attempts to criminalize the human communication necessary for social cohesion and democratic governance. Would you have maintained your natural human need to share information and discuss community problems while living under comprehensive gossip prosecution? Or would you have succumbed to the fear and isolation that communication surveillance was designed to create in order to maintain institutional control over social information and community discussion?